call, please.
Director Boyd?
Here.
Director Decker?
Here.
Director Slater-Carter?
Present.
Director Harvey?
Here.
Director Lohman?
Here.
And for the record, it is January 16, 2020, and it is 7:30 p.m. There is no president's statement. I have a public comment from Greg Villegas.
Okay. All right, quiet down there, people. This is important.
Mine's gonna be better.
You're getting entirely too familiar.
Boy, you should see what's happening to me now that I wrote those articles on Coastside Buzz. I'm getting them well known. So I wanted to talk about the LCP amendment, the Local Coastal Program Amendment. I wanted to ensure that everybody here tonight and the public who may be watching are aware that the Planning Commission is holding a meeting the evening of January 22nd.
Which is when?
County or Half Moon Bay?
Half Moon Bay.
Okay.
No, they're holding it in Half Moon Bay next Wednesday.
Is it Wednesday?
Wednesday.
Okay, whatever the 22nd is. To allow the Mid-Penn Cypress Point project to progress. Now, I'm not going to burden you all with the arguments for or against adding the population density in Moss Beach, but I will note that the amendment in question seeks to reduce the project side. So on its face, it seems innocent enough. However, I've seen emails among the county staff which state that if this amendment is approved, further appeals, including at the Coastal Commission, will no longer be allowed. So the apparent intent of the amendment would avoid further public scrutiny and comment. Construction of the planned housing project bears directly on the capital costs and asset replenishment burdens faced by existing Mid-Coast taxpayers. In light of the burdens these population expansions will place on our infrastructure, and to ensure that the ratepayers who already face significant cost increases to fund asset replenishment do not subsidize profits of the real estate interests behind those projects, I'm requesting that all connection or impact fees in Montara's water district be revisited immediately together with the ongoing rate studies. As one example of the harm that might be done, there are potentially 4 roundabouts to be added by the new transportation plan, which I call Disconnect the Coast Side. I was told yesterday by an MCC member that each roundabout would cost about $2.5 million, and that Big Wave had negotiated down their contribution to the single roundabout being added for them to just $275,000. Now, whether those facts bear out or not, it's clear that we need to insist that there's transparency and accountability on all aspects of these projects and their impact on our cost of living and quality of life. So I encourage all residents to attend the January 22nd meeting in Half Moon Bay and voice their opinions. And I request an action item that you revisit all connection or impact fees together with the ongoing rate studies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rick,
Public comment?
public comment.
Can we dim the lights? This is a,
Do you have are you putting on?
it's on
Okay.
Clemens' computer.
I'm moving to the
This will be less than a minute.
still getting
I hope not to offend anybody with this. But it's okay if you're offended. See if you can give it a shot here.
And we are ready to roll.
I'm not picking it up. You can pick it up. I'm not picking it up. Somebody's got to pick it up. I'll pick it up. You're clean. My hand is clean. Oh yeah, I'm Charmin. You can't hear it. That's how I know that. Charmin is like a washcloth.
And the grand finale.
Yeah, I'm Charmin. It does have a point. My hand is clean.
Enjoy the go with Charmin. And for an extra clean finish, try Charmin Flushable Wipes.
Besides everything being wrong with this commercial, there's the really obvious problem at the end that Charmin has launched a massive campaign on flushable wipes. I would like to ask for an agenda item at the next meeting to get discussion of what kind of letters we can send out, what kind of policies we can do to Charmin, to our state sewer agencies at the state, our special districts organizations, everybody we can do to send letters directly to Charmin, saying this is the worst idea we've heard of in a millennium. So it's a request for an agenda item for next month, next meeting.
Next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, future agenda item. No.
And this is just on late night TV, the night shows, there's about 8 or 9 different versions of this commercial that all have the fantastic endings of, and also go use our flushable wipes too right now. So.
I would also suggest that we send a solution to them. The problem is not with using flushable wipes. It is that they are non-dissolvable. And so what we should suggest is that Sherman should start a campaign handing out little trash bags to go in your bathroom to dispose of them in, because they are a useful product. But like so many other things, maybe Sherman could even put on its bag, there are only 3 things that should go down a toilet. One is toilet paper, and we know the other 2. Everything else should go in this bag to go to the dump.
What about water?
That's a given, yeah.
I see.
4. Thank you.
I would just like to throw out that perhaps Christine or Clemens could contact our PR people at Recology. And that is someone that Christine talked to already. His name is Eric Potasner. And just voice your concern and I'm sure he could aid in this.
You know, it would be wonderful to get the whole corporation of Recology and the whole trash and waste industry involved in this. One of the things that this does is it increases your sewer rates.
Yep.
Because these things get caught on various flaws in the piping that gets down, and they gum up the pumps and the pipes, and so it takes labor, and it takes equipment repair and equipment replacement. These are not the only things that get stuck there, but they are a large portion of them. In the city of London, England, there was, how big was it? It was a
Gigantic.
fat glob made up of these non-dissolvable things and the cold fat that gets in the sewer
tons.
system, and it was tons. It was bigger than
It was bigger
multiple
than,
school
it was bigger
buses.
Than 2 elephants.
There you go.
That's what they said.
And so getting it out was a problem. So rather than go into this with too much detail,
Well, just real
but
quick
it is
also
interesting.
and if you have septic systems, which a lot of folks do in our district especially, that could be the death of your septic system.
yes, it could.
So please don't do that.
And it gets into not only clogs the sewer lines and the force mains, but it also, at the plant, it gets into the digester and causes damage, and it's a big problem right now with the wipes that are in the bottom of the digester.
So it is a huge expense that is reflected in all of our sewer bills. Moving right along, do we have any more oral comments after this scintillating stuff? Okay, public hearing. Item 1, review and possible action concerning establishment of Prop 218 limits for solid waste disposal fee increase, January 1, 2020. Ordinance, thank you, Tracy, 195.
Thanks, Catherine. We're going through this every year. We have a franchise agreement with the College of the Coast, and in accordance with this agreement, we're looking each year at either cost-based or index-based increase. Last year it was cost-based, which Recology was getting actually a 6% increase. And that is because we have a cap of 6% in the formula. This year, the formula results in a 4.71% rate increase over the 2019 rates, so that's pretty much inflation, really. what's going on, however, in the market here is that the Chinese essentially stopped taking our recycling material, and now recycling is actually costing $20 or more per ton to process. Ms. Porter here, she can speak about this in detail. And so this is all was essentially raising the cost on Recology's end. So we mailed notices in accordance with the Prop 218 process to all property owners in the district and notified them about the planned rate increase for January 1. And we have not received a written protest this time around. So the official count for protests is 0. So we are holding this meeting to formally count written protests, but also to establish the Prop 218 limits. And we're doing this by an ordinance of the Montara Water and Sanitary District establishing maximum rates for the collection, removal, disposal of refuse and for recycling services effective January 1, 2020. So staff recommendation is to open the public hearing, allow relevant testimony, close the public hearing, and determine whether or not the proposed rate limits should be approved in accordance with Prop 218. Thanks. If there's any questions from the board for the public.
Thank you. I'm going to make a comment that I hope the U.S.-China trade agreement that was passed today includes having them buy our recycling again, because that was part of this whole big fight. So hopefully next year they will be buying our recycling and turned it into stuff to send back. Any comments or questions from the board? Seeing none. Okay. Do we need to have a motion then?
Do we open public comment at this point, or are we?
Oh, we should open public comment. That's right. Do I have anything from the audience? Greg? Lisa? No? Lou? My goodness. Okay, this is Ordinance 195.
To close.
Let's close the public hearing. Trying to get to this on my machine, but it's not helpful. So all of this information, let's have a motion to close the public hearing.
So move.
Second the motion.
Rick and Jim, all in favor of closing the public hearing?
Aye.
Now we need any discussion from the board? No more? Going once, going twice. Do we have a motion to approve this?
What was the ordinance number again?
195.
I move to accept ordinance number 195, the ordinance of the Montara Water and Sanitary District establishing maximum rates for the collection, removal, and disposal of refuse and for recycling services effectively January 1, 2020.
Okay, Rick, do we have a second?
A second.
Peter, we have a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. On to item 2, review and possible action concerning adoption of a revised master fee schedule to amend solid waste disposal fees. That is...
Yeah, thank you. So our master fee schedule is essentially an ordinance. So we just raised the Prop 218 limit for the solid waste disposal fees, and now we have to implement them in the master fee schedule. So we plug them into that document. No other fees have changed, so water and sewer rates we're going to talk about tonight, but they remain the same. So the recommendation is again, it's a public hearing, to open the public hearing, consider relevant public testimony, close the public hearing, and then adopt the ordinance of the Montara Water and Sanitary District restating and amending the master fee schedule.
Okay, do we have any comments from the board? None? Let's open the public hearing. Do we have any from the community? Seeing none, I need a motion to close public hearing.
I make the motion.
Second, Jim and Rick. All those in favor of closing the public hearing?
Aye.
Aye. Abstentions, objections, hearing none. Do we have any board discussion of the adoption of the revised master fee schedule? I would note for the audience that in our master fee schedule, we ask for construction and all other projects, if you have a debris box, that you rent it from Seacoast. That's in our ordinance as well, so please, it has been our ordinance for a very long time. All right, do I have a motion for ordinance 194?
So moved.
Scott, second?
Second.
Jim? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Moving on to the consent agenda. Item 1, approve the minutes for, a lot of minutes, November 7, November 21, and December 5th, and December 19th for 2019. Approve financial statements for November 2019. Approve warrants for January 1, 2019. SAM flow report for November 2019. Monthly review of current investment portfolio. Number 6, connection permit applications received. Number 7, monthly water production report for November 2019. 8, rain report. 9,
Yay.
solar energy report. Yay, rain is here. And 1.3 inches today.
Yay, solar, too.
Monthly public agency retirement service report for August 2019, and approval of the Valamar Sewer Mainline Extension Agreement Resolution 1667. Does anybody have anything you want removed from the consent agenda?
Move to accept the consent agenda.
Rick?
Second.
Scott? Discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Abstentions? Motion, consent agenda carries. Thank you very much. Moving on to old business, review and possible action concerning water rate study.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. So, we've gone this since quite some time. We are actually looking at increasing the water rates this time around since April. We've been talking about this quite a bit longer. And we prepared a presentation, so we're probably going to project it best up there again.
Okay. And I might add that the title on the document is the Water System Reliability Charges. And I think it's important that we emphasize that the money is going to be budgeted and dedicated for specific purposes. It doesn't just go into a general fund.
So, let me see if I can get this projected properly. Okay, well, I think we'll live with that. Okay. All right. So, as Catherine pointed out, the board decided on a particular name for this. We want to call this the Water System Reliability Charges. And as Catherine pointed out, we're looking at actually establishing a separate charge on top for a separate charge for essentially capital needs of the system. So, in this presentation, we really want to highlight, how did we arrive to this point? And to do that, we need to really look at what are actually the needs to replace infrastructure, that's why we also looked at what did we do historically here, look backwards. We recently met with the Finance Committee on January 7. So this is now a report that we are having the support of the Finance Committee to present this. And the Finance Committee actually made some recommendations that we're going to ask to consider tonight. So we're also, of course, then looking at what is actually proposed. And so Alex and I are going to share this presentation. I'm going to hand this over when we look at really the numbers and the what's actually really proposed. So first, we want to really establish the need. Why are we doing this, right? So the Finance Committee recommendation is supporting to the collection of a $1 million water per year water system reliability charge. And we have been thinking through this if we should actually add an inflation adjustment to this or not. What also came out, I think, very clearly in the Finance Committee meeting that we want the board to look really at hardship assistance. How can people that are impacted by this additional rate, how can we soften the impact if there are circumstances that prevent them from paying the full amount? So, first of all, this is not a need that is a particular project and then it is disappearing again. This is an ongoing, continuing financial need. So what we're doing here really is we're looking at how much money does the district need to invest every year to replace its infrastructure. And so we did this actually at the last meeting in detail. SRT made a presentation. And we've been doing this for actually, as I mentioned, quite some time already, and established that we have a roughly $2 million capital rehabilitation needs today. And so SRT used standard age of infrastructure assessment analysis to do that. And back to, when do we need this money and how is this applied? And why did this not come up in the past year, let's say, for example? And the reason is, of course, that we can maintain and band-aid what we have to a certain point. And eventually, all facilities essentially become so frail that that they fail essentially. So replacement is really the way to go. This is what we have to do. This is what everybody has to do. At one point, you can't drive that car anymore. You have to buy a new one. So now, how do we really address this in the past? What money did we use in the past for capital projects? And why are the current rates inadequate to do that? And it has to do with that we really provided only roughly $500,000, and it may actually have been a little bit less annually for capital projects from rates. The rest came from a different source. This is explained in the next slide. And this, what we started out with having roughly $500,000 annually for a capital project, has really decreased over the 15 or so years, 16 years that we run the water system. And some reasons are, and there's many more than that, but we see a lot of regulatory oversight at the staff level that was added in those 15 years. So this is really water sampling, monitoring. It also actually results ultimately in capital projects. The state comes and tells us you have to implement a certain project. You have to add a treatment plant here or so. We did add a new operator, and this has also to do with this increased regulatory oversight, additional demands on the operators. We also see really a cost increase in capital projects on the water side. So in the past years, we always looked at a foot of pipe is going to cost us $200 to replace. Now it's really 400 foot or more for a pipe replacement. So in 14 and 15 was the last time we went and looked at our rates and assessed the situation. And we set rates at the time. And those rates, we see now clearly, don't fully address really the infrastructure needs. And there's also a reason why this is the case. We definitely thought about this in 14-15, I think very intensely, how to set the rates. And we just went through a phase of, for example, building the tanks. We spent a lot of money, millions of dollars to replace our tanks. So went through a heavy phase of heavy lifting on the capital side for the water system. And so what has changed, what we saw in 2014-15 different than now, is we see a reduced water consumption, lower water sales. Now, we considered that, of course. We considered during the 14-15 rate setting that customers are going to conserve, but I think we saw that the customers were actually better at conserving than we anticipated. We also had the assumption in 14-15 that was right after the repeal of the moratorium that there would be more development work in construction, which essentially means for us fees, and fees that can be used for capital projects. So we see a lower number of connections and fewer new customers than we anticipated in 14-15. So here's the cash flow projections from that 14-15 study. And if you're looking at the study itself in red numbers, let's look at 18-19. We assumed that we would actually see revenue of $2.1 million, but in reality, what we're collecting is $1.9 million. So there is that's definitely taking away from what we can spend on the capital side. Operations side, our operations budget is relatively stable. We're going to take a look at this later today as well, and you'll see that throughout the years our operations needs aren't changing significantly. I think the biggest change was the addition of a new operator. So now, why are we thinking about a separate water system reliability charge? Why are we not looking at a different way of funding all of these projects? And the reason here really is that, as I mentioned before, this is a continuous need. This is not a single project or a group of projects. This is more like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. I think we used that here before, where you know, once you're done with the whole bridge, you start at the other end again, and continue painting. So what's also, I think, important to understand is to be able to, and I think we have a, yeah, we're gonna go into this. So what's very important here also is that we used in the past 15 years roughly $10 million from other funds. GeoBond, we saw $4 million along through the SRF loans. We used some grants in the past. So we supplemented what we got from operations, the $500,000 or less, with significant funds from other sources. And those have dried up. So we don't have any GeoBond money left to spend, for example. And so here again, why are we not looking at different funding mechanism, grant versus loan, for example? And to be able to take out a loan, we need sufficient income through rates. Every bank is going to look at the debt service ratio and is going to understand if the rates are sufficient to pay off the loan. So just like a mortgage, you have to have an income that actually supports paying that mortgage. Additionally, if we can pay cash for projects, pay as you go, it's definitely the cheapest funding mechanism there is. Of course, it doesn't exclude us really from pursuing other funding mechanisms. We're going to continue looking at grants. We're going to continue looking at loans if we see an advantage in this. But it doesn't take away from that overall we need money to keep the system up and running and replace infrastructure. So here's a little bit the tally of what do we actually use. So we had a $19 million bond that was authorized, and it was authorized by an over 80% yes vote by the community. This will be paid off in 2028, so we see this on the horizon. So in 8 years, the community will not have to pay for the general obligation bond that allowed this agency to purchase the water system. And $11 million were used for the purchase, and $6.5 million, or probably a little bit less, for capital projects. So we had total of and that was originally in 2001. In 2012, we were actually able to refinance the GeoBond and lower actually the rate for the individual in the district. So even though we were able to take out the remaining $1.5 million, it didn't increase the payments for the homeowner. It's still lowered by a significant percentage the actual contribution that the homeowners have to make to pay this off in 2012. Mentioned the SRF loan, roughly $4 million. Of course, we have to pay the SRF loan back. This is the majority is still outstanding. We saw other loans. The PNC equipment loan was a shared loan with the sewer side. We refinanced that as well. We refinanced the GeoBond and the PNC equipment loan 2012, 2013. It was pretty much very close, and we're able to get a much better interest rate. So here's a little bit a look at just a look back, so these are rounded up and rounded down numbers. I would probably say more rounded down numbers, rough numbers of the projects that we did in the past and the money that we spent And you can see that we at least spent $15 million between 2004 and 2019. And I mean, some years more, some years less, but I mean, ultimately this amounts to almost $1 million a year in capital projects that we were able to spend because we had this additional money available. So what do we need to do? We need to replace 8.5 miles of water mains. There is a lot of complicated stuff associated with it. And valves and many other things. There's PRV stations. Our system is rather complicated.
What's a PRV?
Pressure reducing station. So
Thank you.
We have a high amount of PRV stations in the district, and we have treatment plants that need replacements. And so, for example, the Pillar Ridge plant was an asset that the district acquired, but it is in bad shape and needs work. And we definitely have to invest into this treatment plant and into the sources to keep them up and running. The same for Alta Vista water treatment plant. It's around 50 years old. Our tanks, we did a lot of work on the tanks already. Now it's time really to look at the tanks that we didn't address in the first go around. And there is 4 tanks that we know need desperate work. We are the only agency on the peninsula that is using 100% local sources, so we have a high number of wells, groundwater wells, that need regular maintenance, regular replacement, and we've done some work in the past years, but for example, we haven't addressed the Pillar Ridge wells, and that's also something that is coming up. So this is really more or less what SRT presented the last time, where we say, okay, well, we can look at this, we can say, let's say for the next 20 years, what is needed, and we'll come up with roughly $40 million, and that is actually 2019 dollars. So now we're getting really to the proposed water system reliability charge, and I think I'm going to hand it over to you, Alex, at this point, and really laying out what is it that we're proposing. So if you want to take over.
Yeah, and I just want to comment. I mean, what's being dealt with here at this district is being dealt with at many other regional agencies in and around the country. A lot of folks are facing the need to replace old infrastructure. Here you have a lot of pipelines that were put in over 60 years ago. And you're also in coastal conditions where a pump station may not last as long as it does in the desert. So there's a lot of need out there for repairing and rehabbing and replacing infrastructure. And what's being proposed is a new separate charge that would be levied separate from your regular water rates, the water system reliability charge. It would be collected on the property tax rolls. This is for replacing the system that benefits all the homes in the area. So it would be the homeowners who would pay. There'd be no change to your existing rates, but this would really be generating a dedicated funding source for rehabilitations and replacements in future years. Now, we're not, the suggestion isn't, well, I guess it's one of the options to, go to the full level right out of the gate, but it is important to get a charge like this established and get a funding stream in place so that you can start addressing a lot of the capital needs that are out there. This slide here, we met with the Finance Committee over the last number of months. We've looked at, considered a number of different options. Should it be a fixed charge? Should it be volumetrics and kind of mix? And at the end of the day, looking at the pros and cons, working with the Finance Committee, the consensus was a fixed charge would be the fairest and most appropriate way to go forward. based on the meter size, which is a representation of the demand that's being placed on the system by the different customers. Now, almost all your customers are at that base rate, the base meter size, 5/8 and 3/4 inch. So we calculated a charge to generate $1 million per year in funding roughly every year, that customer group, which is pretty much all your residential customers and some of the small commercial, the charge would be about $558 per year on the property tax roll. So I think there's an acknowledgement this is a significant increase, and another acknowledgement that no, this isn't solving all our problems. So I think the attempt was made to balance trying to keep things affordable with the other side of the coin, addressing the infrastructure needs that the district has. The other thing we just wanted to mention is that you do have some customers who get private fire service only. They have their own wells, but they benefit from this infrastructure as well. So the proposed charge is that if there's a single-family home that's just getting fire service, that they pay a charge that's equal to half of the full rate, accounting for the infrastructure that's needed to provide them the emergency fire service. The next slide shows an example of what the charge would look like if you were to go with a full $2 million of funding per year right out of the gate. And of course, this would be a charge that's twice as much. It'd be $1,100 and change per most of your customers in the district in the single-family homes. Moving on to the next slide. And my take was, we worked with a lot of other agencies on very similar issues like this. And from my perspective, there's always a kind of a balance of where we want to go, recognizing this is a big burden you're putting on the ratepayers out there, but it's stuff that everyone needs to contribute to. So I'm usually content to see agencies take steps in the right direction. So both these options would work. At some point, if you started with the halfway $1 million charge, at some point in the future, you could always step that up based on the board's future analysis, and has been discussed at our finance committee meeting also and other meetings. You do have the GO bonds that reach their final expiration date in 2028, so that may be a logical point where there could be a step up in the funding. The other thing that came out of the finance committee meeting was there's concern that there are a lot of folks in the community who they may be owning a nice home that maybe is worth $1 million here in the Bay Area, but they don't have a hearty revenue stream coming in. There's a lot of folks who are retired, folks on fixed incomes. So what can the district do to provide some sort of reduction in the charge to help folks in this situation out? Now, the one thing that limiting that in California is Prop 218, which doesn't allow you to charge one customer more in order to fund a discount for another customer. So what many attorneys are comfortable with is looking at, are there other funding sources that the district could use to fund a economic hardship program? And looking at your revenue stream is you do have a few things that could be used. You have cell phone tower leases, you have some miscellaneous fees, and you also get some property tax revenues that would be likely candidates for what could be used to fund an economic hardship program, keeping in mind that every cent you put to this program is a less dollar that you have for your regular operation, so it could result in the future in the need for a little bit more rate increases. Some other things that the district has been doing that benefit low users is you do have volumetric rates in both water and sewer. Your water rates, only about 30% of the charges are fixed charges, 70% is volumetric, and by contrast, a very high percentage of your calls here in the district are fixed. So low-use customers are benefiting, people who have a lot of control over the bill, and also you have volumetric sewer rates subject to a minimum, but meaning you don't have a fixed charge like probably many other regional agencies have. So folks do have quite a bit of control of their bill. And the third thing that benefits economic hardship is Pillar Point, the mobile home park community. They have their own local distribution system, and they have a separate master meter agreement with the district where they're not paying separate charges for each separate home. They're paying a single meter charge. So, they're paying in general less than what a separate single-family home would pay with its own service meter. So there are things you're currently doing, but there are additional things you can do that are being put out there for board consideration and direction tonight. The other thing I mentioned is you're not the only agency facing the infrastructure needs. Everyone else is. There's a tidal wave of pipeline replacements out there. There's a lot of old infrastructure both on the water and the sewer side. So we just pulled together some numbers as what have other agencies been doing over the last roughly decade, and what has Montara been doing? And we look at the top, we see your water and sewer rates for many years over the last decade was inflationary. Which is good. I mean, I give a lot of kudos to the board. There's a lot of agencies that will defer the inflationary rate increases each year and dig a hole. But you guys have provided good, I think, financial stewardship by raising the rates each year to keep on top of the costs. But when we look at what some other agencies have done over the last decade, I've worked with Redwood City, who's been trying to address this infrastructure financing need for over a decade. They did it by implementing, 9% rate increases, sometimes a little more, every year for going back before 2010, actually, both on water and sewer, to a point where they were able to raise their annual pay-as-you-go funding stream from $1 million a year to $6 or $7 million per year, where they are now. You also started doing that on your sewer side, which we'll talk about later. We look at other agencies, San Bruno, double-digit, or high single-digit rate increases year after year after year over the past decade until they got a point where they achieve the plateau of having a reasonable or a funding stream that addresses their needs. San Mateo on their sewer side is facing major capital needs for their sewer collection system and treatment plant. Not only did they forge ahead with 8 or 9% rate increases for over a decade, a few years ago they had to do a 36% rate increase when their usage went down. And since then, they've adopted a series of 5 additional 14% rate increases to keep the revenue stream moving in the right direction. So that was a little more significant than some other agencies. Same with Mid-Peninsula Water District that serves Belmont. And I worked with San Carlos for a number of years, always trying to get their rates higher. They had some major infrastructure replacement needs they realized in 2013. So they adopted a 25%, 20%, and 10% rate increase that year to get the funding stream up. So sorry to ramble on about all those things, but you're not alone in what you're dealing with. A lot of these other agencies have already done some of the heavy lifting with the rates, but not all. Other ones are continuing to raise rates. And then on this slide here is just kind of some examples of what some other regional agencies have identified are their capital funding needs, and it's quite substantial, not only in the Bay Area, but all around California and the entire United States. Next slide. Just showing what the typical water bill was a question. This is for a typical regular bi-monthly water bill. A customer here in the district uses an average of 5 units per month is the new average, 10 units bi-monthly. And the charge works out to be about $76 per month for regular water service. People see this on a bi-monthly water bill of about $152. Obviously, some folks pay more, some pay less. But probably about 60 to 65% of your customers pay bills that are up to this level. So no changes are proposed to your current water rates, but what is being proposed is a separate water system reliability charge for the capital funding stream. The goal is to get some additional board input here. These charges need to be in place by the end of the fiscal year so they can get onto the property tax roll. So the plan is to mail the Prop 218 notices in the spring, April or May, hold a public hearing in June, and you're really not taking any specific action as a board until that time at the public hearing when you're called upon to adopt the rates. And even when you do a Prop 218 notice, the board always has discretion to adopt anything up to that level. You just can't exceed the levels noticed in the Prop 218 rates. And then after that, you have a little time to get the charges on the tax rolls. And I think that's it. I'll turn it over to Clemens and the board for additional discussion.
Yeah, I'm happy to hand it to the board. I think maybe the finance committee is, could also comment.
Yeah, we met a while ago, and Peter and I and Alex, Clemens, and Tanya, we discussed these for a long time, and we came to these conclusions that this is the best path forward. Peter?
Yes. I think the suggestion that we make for raising $1 million will be a step in the right direction. Unfortunately, It won't be enough to cover all of our expenses as they are envisioned for the next 20 years, but it's a step in the right direction. I also realize that it would be, for most people, a 50 to 60% increase on their water rate if you add that charge in, and that is a big blow. And I see very clearly that we must ameliorate that blow for those people who are in the lower income section somewhat. And we have the ability to do that with some fees that were just shown, like the rental of the radio tower or the cell tower that is here. We could basically, if there are 20% of our customers that are not quite able to meet the challenge of that increase, we could give them a reduction. That would take away that $36,000, but on the other hand, it would also be a 20% reduction in the fee for those people who are probably qualifying for a lower rate.
And maybe one more time, just to be very clear with the board on what we're looking at right now. We're really looking to establish the $1 million funding level to pursue essentially that $1 million funding level. And that is what we worked out with the Finance Committee. We're looking at a discussion or confirmation of how to handle the private fire services, meaning that the current suggestion that is coming from staff is that the homes that don't have a domestic connection with the district but a private fire protection connection pay a share, a fixed share of the amount. We're suggesting 50%. What we also have in this presentation is now the recommendation to go with a fixed charge on this, and we would like some input from the board on a potential hardship assistance and how to handle that. Which funds to use? Should this be implemented at all? What would be the criteria? How do we want to look at who's eligible for this? It could be, I think, actually, yeah. So that's really the question or discussions that we're looking for feedback from the board tonight.
So, and to review, there are three main reasons why this isn't a surprise or out of the blue. One, the geobonds, are we finished spending those? Two, the structures that were put in 60 years ago are coming to have to be replaced at this point. And the third thing is that the general costs and the things that have to be replaced from state regulators and other reasons. So for those three reasons, we have to. It's not a surprise. It's just it's something that has to be done, and it's coming. And it's coming now at this point.
Okay, Rick.
Two comments. A couple of years ago, when I was attending some special districts convention up in Sacramento, there was a big presentation by the special districts has its own loan agency kind of thing, and they stated that the number one criteria they use when approving loans to special districts is, does the special districts have the courage to raise rates when necessary? If they don't have the courage to raise rates when necessary, they're not going to give them loan money. So that was the big thing that I learned. Also, if you noticed on the chart, CCWD, apparently they're going for 3 times the amount of money we're going for. So just to put that in proportion a little bit.
I also heard that CCWD, through the grapevine, has a large reserve fund already built up And that was a surprise to me, which means that they have, over the past few years, probably implemented a way higher yearly increase than we have. And that is concerning to us, especially in view of the consolidation efforts, the so-called consolidation efforts that we have seen, and the ability by CCWD to buy us with their reserve funds. That is not a good thing that is there, and it is a warning to us that if we want to play our game and be an independent agency, that we better build up our reserves before somebody else with more reserves takes over.
Good point. Scott?
Good point, Peter.
Jim?
Saying all the
Okay, I with my handy dandy calculator, discovered that what we're asking for, on average, for the lower 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch meter, 5/8 and 3/4 inch meters, is $1.60 a day per year. It's not a whole lot of money. The average use on a bi-monthly bill is $2.50 a day. That's $2.50 for your baths, your showers, your car washing, your washing machine, your dishwasher. Essentially, all of that good, clean, beautiful, well-treated water that comes out of your tap is, on average, and some people have a higher rate, you'd pay more, some people have, but this is just the average, is $1.60, and I'm sorry, $2.50 a day. So we are really pretty darn efficient. The other thing I will mention in relation to CCWD and all the other agencies on the chart is our bond money and this money goes for infrastructure improvements. We're not buying water from Hetch Hetchy. All we're doing is paying for the electrical to get it up out of the ground, and then the labor and the chemicals to treat it and pump it to you. So everyone here is getting a really good deal. If you buy a quart of water at the grocery store in that non-disposable plastic container, you're not only paying the dollar for the quart of water, you pay to get rid of that plastic container. So again, we've got a pretty darn good deal. And I think that, as folks have heard me say before, construction doesn't get cheaper. So I think we should do it. I will go further to say that I think for the hardship rate, I think we need to figure out a standard as how to implement the hardship rate. And before we give you a firm answer on that, we should look at and research what the options are. As far as the fire rate, I realize that for the fire folks, we have essentially had them pay half of the household connection, new connection rate, and so on for the fire flow.
That's correct, yes.
So we are keeping our policy. We don't have that many. Well, we've only got about 300. How many do we have on the system? We've got about 300 in the district, but on the system, is it about 200?
Inside the, yes, in our system, yes.
Inside the urban area.
Roughly 200, yes.
So bringing them up to the $1.60 a day would probably not make any difference. If we did that, it would allow us to slowly accumulate perhaps a little bit more, and everyone with a house needs good pumps. needs good pipes. You certainly don't want to have the hydrant down the street fail. And this is our system is not designed for conflagrations. It is designed for single house fires. For those who are new to the district and predate the older times, we had quite a few hydrants that had no pressure. That if there was a fire, you were out of luck. And one of the things we have done is to have pressure. Greg has mentioned that we don't test our hydrants perhaps as often, but they have all been tested, and we do have flow to each and every one of them in an adequate amount, and that's what really counts. So I agree with the $1.60 a day additional charge for every person. It's amazing how that penny profit adds up to $1 million then.
Yeah.
And please feel free to check my mail. I hear a comment, and we will take. I have a public comment from old business from Greg Dagus, but I wanted to make sure everyone at the board had a chance to speak.
Good.
No,
I just want to thank Clemens, Alex, Peter, Tanya, Allison, Tracy for all the work that staff has done, and consultants in getting this report in, and you guys all did a great job. So thank you.
I would like to see this report printed with several copies and left at the desk or on the counter for people who come in to be able to look at it. Because there's a lot of very valuable information in this about not only about future needs, but about how well we have spent the money for this district in the past. And I think we've done an excellent job.
And I also want to thank Peter as a new board member who jumped right in to be the financial officer. He's jumped in with both feet running.
One foot.
One foot running.
The other foot still
okay.
Repaired.
Always good to have both.
Any more comments from the board?
No.
Okay. Let's have Greg Diegas come up and speak on.
So this is a tough one for me because I'm a financial services professional and a ratepayer. And it reminds me of the old joke about the engineer and the guillotine during the French Revolution when they're trying out a new guillotine to speed things up, and the first guy they try and cut his head off is a priest, and it doesn't work. And they let him go because it was an act of God. And the second guy they try and cut his head off, doesn't work. It was a lawyer who said, you can't do it again, it's double jeopardy. They let him go. They put the engineer down there, it doesn't work. And the engineer, looking up, says, hey, I think I see your problem. So here I am, and I got to say, I appreciate that Alex acted on a suggestion I made and included in the sewer rate study a projection of what the reserve balances are going to be.
This is just water.
I know.
Okay.
So in the sewer thing you're going to see later there's reserve balances. But did I miss it? I don't see the reserve balances here. He's got a $2 million a year capital expenditure need. You're raising one. You already borrowed $500,000 to put it in the water, which didn't have reserves. So you're running negative reserves. Where are you getting the money? I don't understand how this adds up. So I'll repeat my suggestion, and I'll put it in writing, and Tracy has it. You need to project the reserve balances for both water and sewer going forward. It's one of the principal criteria you have to use in making a decision on whether or not you're raising the rates adequately. And if you don't do that, how do you know that the money, where's the forecasted revenue? Did I miss it?
Well,
So I'm sorry, but, I just cut my own head off as a ratepayer. But it doesn't seem like you raised enough money. What's he going to do? Not spend $2 million? What's going to break? I don't get it.
Can we put that in an ad in the paper with your name?
Yeah.
Clemens.
Yes. I'm going to repeat what I said at the Finance Committee meeting. What you're essentially asking for is a cash flow projection, and that's not necessarily something that we need to consider here, because the way we spent cash is not doesn't have to be even. As you see, we can spend $2 million in one year, we can spend $500,000 in another year, meaning we establish the funding need, but that doesn't mean that during the time. So right now we're saying we need $2 million. We're asking the board for $1 million, which means that during the time we build up this the funds for this established requirement, we can continue to defer projects essentially. So the cash flow projection doesn't necessarily isn't in my mind necessarily a requirement to make this decision.
Right. So the finance committee wanted to be conservative, and start off. We could have started off with a bigger bang, but we wanted to start off at this step initially. So reserves are.
It is not so that this decision made today, or that's going to be made today, is final. It is a step in the direction. It doesn't mean that in a year from now we cannot look at it and then say, oh, we should have really repaired this tank because it's about to burst. And now we have no choice but to immediately raise $2 million. That is a chance then to discuss this again and say, hey guys, we need another $1 million and we need it now. So it is a preliminary step. It is not a definite step. But I do want to say that over these years, if you look back over all these years that we've just seen the numbers of, Clemens has done a fantastic job with his team to keep the system going. We've never had an outage that I have noticed. The water has always been available. We've been happy with the work with the duct tape that Clemens has performed without having had sufficient reserves to cover some more substantial improvement. And I think that we can count on him for at least the next year to keep things going with the duct tape. And while we are then looking at the result, we can say, let's think about this again, then when this is somewhat of a less of a blow to the community than it is already now with the 60% increase.
Thank you, Peter. And I want to add that this is not a final decision. There is no decision really made. We are getting closer to what we're going to bring later again to the board. This is really a preparation for the public hearing at which we want to ultimately set the rate. So that's going to be done in conjunction with the sewer rate study, which is our next topic.
Okay, so it says the action required is to direct staff. So far, the direction to staff from me is to explore various ways of determining who is a hardship case.
That's good.
I think the first place to look is to talk to Recology, because they already have a hardship program. So I think that would be a useful thing. I don't think it should be based on age. I don't think it should be based on anything except verifiable data.
Yes.
And we do not want to be in the position of doing the verification. So I believe there's a PG&E program.
Right.
I believe that is what Recology uses. And so we could perhaps work with Recology and PG&E on this. And I want also to make sure that our staff is protected from anybody who would come in. I think it should. I don't think it should be handled necessarily just over the phone, but we need to make it very clear and in writing that this is an executive decision that is handled by the board, not by staff, and that so that the staff has doesn't have to deal with what can be very sensitive and emotional discussions.
Very good point.
And speaking of staff, I would add that it's our fabulous staff that applies the duct tape and knows where to, with the help of the engineer, knows where to apply it. So I heard a phrase today, and I will repeat it, and that is, without the team, you don't realize your dream. And it probably came from one of those posters that we all saw 10, 15, 20 years ago. That said, our team is the community, the people who work here, our consultants, and anybody we are fortunate enough to have involved in this board. So I will thank everybody for making our dream of being an independent water district realizable and continuing. Item number 2 under new business. Why is it a 2 under new business?
The numbering got a little.
Okay. Item number, well, I'll just say there is no item 1 under new business. So that our meeting conforms to the agenda, we will do item number 2 under new business, review and possible action concerning the sewer rate study. And the goal, or the direction to board is to direct staff, so we won't be voting on anything, but we will be giving direction to staff.
There's actually an additional recommendation that didn't make it in writing, since we have now a presentation. And something to work with, we would like, after this presentation, for this study to be referred to the Finance Committee so that we then also can talk to the Finance Committee through what we're going to do on the sewer side.
Okay.
Yeah. Sounds good.
So,
I'm going to go back there.
Before we start the presentation, just want to say, last time we looked at this in 2018, set a Prop 218 limit for 2 years. We knew already then that we would have to reassess today, and this is what we're doing. And with that, I'm going to try to pull up the presentation and hand it over to Alex.
I'm going to go get out of the light.
And I think you did receive some of the information, kind of the analysis that we had done. We apologize we couldn't get it sooner. We were working on the other thing and kind of scrambling to get the sewer stuff together, but we did kind of hash through a lot of this stuff, and I think we're at a place now we're pretty comfortable with the draft numbers and wanted to present a few alternatives. And while we're pulling this up, I want to make just a few comments. Greg is right, this doesn't fully solve all the long-term needs, but I'll tell you, this is a huge step in the right direction to funding your water needs. And on top of that, this isn't your only source of capital funding. You're still going to have connection fees coming in. You're still going to have some money that the rates are generating a little bit towards capital, which some years may be less, some years may be more, depending on what happens. So this is a monumentally big step in the right direction, even if you're not reaching the end game. Sewer. So that's the other, I guess you're covering all your rates tonight, your garbage, water, and now sewer. This is kind of the first cut at the sewer rate study. We wanted to share kind of our preliminary findings and refresh everyone's memory of what's happened in the past. So I'll talk just quickly about the background of the rates. Again, infrastructure needs are a big theme of the sewer, just the same as they were with the water. And we'll talk about some preliminary recommendations. And on the next slide, background, your sewer enterprise, 2 years later, you did some significant rate increases 2 years ago as the first 2 steps on a longer term path, and your sewer enterprise is in a much stronger financial footing. And I'll look again, I mentioned it last time, I think this district has done a good job grappling with the need to raise rates and trying to keep things affordable, so there's always been a little bit of a balance, but you have kept your rates moving in the right direction for over a decade, which has kept your enterprises in good shape. And you have been able to address a lot of the maintenance and proactively address some of the rehabilitation needs that your sewer system has over the years. However, there are more funding needs going forward, not just here, but also with the regional treatment plan. And we already mentioned a lot of other agencies dealing with the same issue of how you're going to fund all these aging facilities that are coming to the end of their useful lives. Next slide just shows sewer rate history going back to 2012. Many years of inflationary rate increases, which is good in my mind. And then going back 2 years, there were 2 significant rate increases adopted to start generating more money for the capital needs, and also the operating costs at the regional treatment plant, the sewer authority's mid-coast side, had gone up significantly. I think it was around 2018. So those rate increases you adopted last time, got your funding in line to fund operating needs and started generating additional funds for capital. Before that, it was about, we say there's only 8-9 years of inflationary rate increases, but when you did your prior rate study, which was 8 years before, that was back in 2010, you adopted what were planned to be 4 years of rate increases, but the board was able to phase them in over 8 years instead by trying to keep costs down and trying to minimize the increases that were going to the ratepayers. And what happened over that time frame from the customer side is there was a bit of conservation as well. So people, even though the rates were gradually ramping up, people cut back in their water use. And you factor that in with inflation, a lot of customers for roughly a decade didn't really see any real dollar increase in what they were paying on the sewer bills, and the district was able to address its needs. But going forward, the big story, just like we just heard, it's the funding needs of the aging facilities. And here I broke it down to a couple of components. One is at the sewer authority mid-coast side. The treatment plant that serves the region is over 40 years old. Like many treatment plants, it was put in a long time ago, largely funded by grants, EPA grants after the Clean Water Act. So there's been very minimal investment that's happened over the years from the ratepayers. It was a grant-funded facility, and not a lot needed to be done for a while, but it's at the end of its useful life, as are many other treatment plants around the U.S. and in the region, and in need of a lot of rehab. There's been a lot of analysis done over the past year as to what those needs are, and a report came out, I think it was maybe as a draft report, or I'm not sure it was the final. After looking at the evaluation of the system, they're identifying, the recommendation was to plan to budget about $40 million for treatment plant upgrades over the next 5 to 10 years. Now in the report, it also noted that some of these needs may be able to be deferred for a little bit if they could do some additional rehab, but it's not going to put off the need to replace the system. It's kind of like doing some Band-Aids to keep things going for a little bit longer, so you're going to end up paying twice for these facilities. On top of that, Sewer Authority Mid-Coast side operates a conveyance pipeline called the Intertie Pipeline System that conveys the water to the treatment plant. And that is aging and has some deficiencies and problems with it. SAM entered into a consent decree with ERP's an environmental group that had sued to minimize, make sure the work was being done to prevent, sewer spills and create environmental issues. And SAM agreed to sign on a consent decree that pretty much committed to fund about $7.8 million of intertie pipeline system improvements by June 30th, 2024. So that's just a few years down the line. And when we look at what are Montara Water and Sanitary District share of costs for the various facilities, it works out to be about $700,000 per year over the next 4 to 5 years. So that's pretty significant, more than what you've historically been used to funding. On top of that, you've got your own collection system. Again, a lot of the pipelines are over 60 years old. You've got a lot of old pump stations operating in coastal conditions. So very similar to what's been done on the water side, the same analysis has been done looking at the condition and age of facilities, and that identifies a need for $1.9 million per year for ongoing rehab and replacement over the long term. Again, doesn't mean you have to start spending that next year, but that's kind of the long-term number that's needed over the next 20 years to address the replacement and rehab needs of the aging facilities. When you add these things together, I know it's not exact match because I think there's some other things at play, but Montara is going to need to fund about $2.5 million per year on average over the next 20 years, which is a lot more than what you're currently funding. Good news is, this isn't a surprise. We talked about this 2 years ago, and we looked at, what if it was like phased in over 5 years to get you to that funding level. And what the district opted to do was take 2 substantial steps in the right direction, with the acknowledgement that we're going to come back 2 years later when better information is available about the wastewater treatment plant since analysis was being done, and reevaluate and decide where we're going to go from here to continue taking steps in the right direction. So at this stage, we just are showing kind of two different financial projections and rate projections. One is if you were to do an upfront increase to get you to that $2.5 million or so of annual funding, you'd have to do a 45% rate increase overnight, and then inflationary rate increases after that. We also developed a preliminary scenario for kind of a phased approach, which is what the board liked last time, and we try to keep it to single digits. So what we developed this option for was, what if you kept forging ahead with 9% rate increases, year after year till you got to your plateau. If you did that, it would probably take about 6 years or so to achieve the full capital funding level. But we're not recommending at this time that you do a long-term increase like that. I think from talking with staff, what's being proposed is, let's take the next few steps in the right direction, and we'll come back and reevaluate based on what reality is in a few years. So what's being proposed as an alternative for board consideration is 3 years of 9% rate increases. The good thing, your water fund has virtually no fund reserves and is running on empty, but your sewer fund does have a healthy level of fund reserves, partly because some capital projects have been deferred. So even while you're phasing in rates, you're still going to be able to do a significant level of capital needs. It's just going to require, likely drawing down about $1.5 million of your reserves, but they'll still be in a reasonable place after that. Next slide. This kind of graphically shows over the next 6 years or so, the colored bars going up represent the various expenses. One I'll point out is the green section. That's the capital funding for Montara, Water and Sanitary District. And then at the red bars are at the top are SAM's capital funding. So SAM is everything from yellow and above. So SAM used to only be about, Sewer Authority Mid-Coast side used to only be about 40% of the overall cost. Now they're around 50% and expected to stay somewhere in that range going forward for both operating and capital. The green line going up there shows what the revenues would be with the projected 9% rate increases. And you can see the green is a little bit below the expenditures for a few years there. That means you're drawing down fund reserves a little bit. But if you were to keep the foot on the rate gas pedal at the gradual 9% level, you'd eventually get to where you need in about 6 years. The next slide shows what the rates actually look like with these 9% rate increases. You've got about 7, 8 different rate categories that are based on wastewater strength. The residential category would see their rate go from about $21 per 100 cubic feet to $27 over that time period. The residential rates, just to refresh everyone's memory, are based on winter water use from 4 billing months in the winter when water use is lowest, meaning that represents what's going into the sewer system. So you don't bill, if someone has a yard and is watering a lot in the summer, that does not impact their sewer bill. Commercial bills, though, are built based on annual water use, and everyone in the community knows you pay these charges on the county tax rolls. On the next slide, this shows what the impacts would be for customers at different levels of use for residential customers. The minimum charge you have is based on 4 units per month. A lot of your costs in the sewer system are fixed, so a lot of agencies have 100% fixed sewer rates, but you have volumetric rates, but there is a significant minimum charge, and you need that because a lot of the costs are fixed. So about half your customers pay that minimum for equivalent of 48 units per year, 4 per month. They'd see the monthly equivalent increase from about $84 to $109 over the 3-year period if everything is phased in exactly as shown here. We also show what some of the charges are for some folks who use a little more. The other thing I wanted to mention from working with a lot of other agencies, I know we did kind of a survey last time of all the agencies, and your rates were kind of in the middle of the pack. With the 2 significant rate increases you did, you're in the upper middle range, and we would anticipate you'd stay in the upper middle range, which I think is kind of an accomplishment for a district your size that doesn't have a large industrial commercial base like some of the other larger agencies in San Mateo have. So that was our draft recommendation, 9% rate increases. No need to change the sewer rate structure at this point. 2 years ago, we kind of went through a cost alignment of all the different rate categories, so you're fine for a while. But one thing that did come up, I think a customer brought this up to Clemens, who brought it up to me, was that the months that you've historically been using to calculate the sewer bill are actually not the 4 lowest use months by the way your billing works. You're using, for the customers in the Montara service area, they get billed based on the usage that shows up on the December bill and the February bi-monthly bill. And those bills reflect water use from the prior 2 months. So your December bill actually reflects use from October and November, which October in particular is a month that still might include some outdoor water use during the dry season. So staff here at Montara pulled all the data for how much water is being used in each of these billing periods, and it was shown that water from February and March that shows up on the April bill, that's during more of a wet weather period, is actually a little bit lower than the water use from the December bill. So the recommendation is to consider transitioning from using your December and February bills as a basis for the sewer usage to the February and leaping forward to the April bills. And what would the impact be? The folks in the Montara water service area, they probably see their billed usage go down about 5%. It bounces around a little from year to year, depending on a lot of factors. So that would result in probably about a 2 to 3% reduction in billed usage overall to the district. But the other side of the coin, those are the lowest use months, so this is just another issue being brought for board consideration. And then next step, so this is the first, we've kind of come to the board with the sewer rate, so we're looking for input and direction. Probably go to the finance committee and hash through some more details there. We could look at other alternatives over the next couple months. We'd anticipate honing the alternatives, coming back to the board for approval of what's going to go in the Prop 218 notices that would go out in April or May. And again, you wouldn't be taking any action on sewer rates until you held your public hearing, most likely in June, in time to get the rates on county tax rolls for the next fiscal year. I think that's
Thank
it.
you, Alex. I think we're going to hand it back to the board.
Okay, bring it back to the board. Questions?
Yeah, after the presentation in the last meeting of the infrastructure requirements for the sewage sand plant, I got the impression after that presentation that their infrastructure is in way worse shape than our water infrastructure. Is that correct, Clemens? Is that a correct assumption?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've invested in the infrastructure in the recent 15 years heavily. We inherited a system that was in dire needs for repairs. Horrible system. Catherine mentioned we are not losing system pressure. I know, Peter, you live in an area that lost system pressure on a regular basis.
Well, our fire hydrant
before
couldn't put out a fire in our house because the pressure wasn't sufficient for the fire truck to come and put the water on our house. The only thing that would have happened was they would have put water on the surrounding houses so that our house would have burned to the ground. Yes.
That's right. And while the SAM staff is also very handy with duct tape, and they can also apply chewing gum, which we can't use on the water side. But they didn't get the funds that we actually saw through the geo bonds here. So SAM staff didn't have the luxury of spending the money that we received to maintain the water system on and put it into the sewer treatment plant and the according IPS, Intertie Pipeline System, and the pump station. So I think there were some projects done at SAM, but I think the frequency was less.
I think it's worth noting that the investment that we in the community have made over the past 15 years in the water system is the kind of thing that when you do it, it leaves you in a much better position. And it's something that we've been working with our partners at SAM to try to get to. There's been some obstruction that has made that difficult, but you're absolutely right. There is definitely work to be done, there's investment to be made, and we and our partners are the ones who are going to be doing that. Some of it will be paying more because the repairs were delayed, and we have already paid substantially more because repairs were hindered.
The hard part will be to find out from our partners in the SAM system how keen they are to get up to date with the infrastructure. Because it's a joint effort.
They have no choice. Because if it doesn't happen, as a SAM board member, and I sat in on a finance committee meeting today, which I will report on during the SAM board report. It's about $30 million for the plant in today's numbers, in today's dollars, and there is nobody wants to raise rates, but we're going to have to raise the rates more now than we would have if Sam had been able to agree on doing it and had not reached such ferocious objection 20 years ago. When actually 20 years ago the SAM plant had been rebuilt and everything was pretty good. There was still some stuff that needed to be replaced, but it wasn't, and so now the costs are higher than it had it been kept up like we've been doing with the water. I will say I'm chair of the SAM board this year, and I want to arrange for the public, other board members, to come on tours. Let me know. Staff is more than willing. We can show you some of the improvements we've made. Actually, in the last 4 years, we've made some major improvements in the way things are functioning. We just put in 2 very nice turbo blowers. We now have redundancy for one of the major functions of our SAM plant, and I'd love to have you come and see them. It's without a sewer plant, you don't get civilization. And but this is work that has to be done, and it appears that Half Moon Bay and Granada both agree.
Are they willing to increase the rates
how they
in
pay
the way
for
that we have just looked at?
How they pay for it is not our problem.
We know that the city as well as Granada are looking at rate increases.
And what kind of rate increase are they considering?
Well, they're working. The city is actively working with a consultant on this, and I understand it's going to be a significant rate increase. The exact outcome will be determined by city council decision. But there's, I would say, a similar, maybe even a little bit higher financial need, since we did already some of the heavy lifting.
Rick and Jim?
The only negative comment I can think of is have we included projections for costs of the Half Moon Bay lawsuit in this also. So that's not a surprise.
That was on my list of questions. The other one is, what if those costs are being looked at as a retroactive charge? How will that affect this?
So, the first part I can answer, and that is yes, we've looked at the temporary increase in cost for the lawsuit is included, but we don't anticipate this an ongoing need. To be an ongoing need. So this is a temporary cost that we've seen now over the past 3 years, and we anticipate maybe another year of elevated expenses due to this lawsuit.
As I
Well,
s-
from the lawsuit, but, so you're not talking about the need for additional capital improvements?
Oh, yeah, no, this is considered,
Okay.
yes.
So,
Just a minute.
Just real quick. As I said
Thank
in
you.
my Half Moon Bay Review article yesterday or so, it's too bad that the millions of dollars that will be wasted on that lawsuit couldn't have been pipe in the ground. So,
Among other things, yes. Peter?
So is there any indication that our partners in SAM are adopting a 45% rate increase next year instead of the just suggested 9% a year over the next couple of years?
I can't answer this because, again, I mean, there may be a similar financing need. Now the city council can make the decision to do this all in 1 year, or they can make a decision to phase this in. So we'll have to wait until
There's
that
no
decision
indication
is made.
at this point which way they're thinking.
You know, I'm talking to staff and not the city council.
Yes.
I know that the staff would like to see this more front-loaded, meaning the rate increase now, so that the money is available, do the heavy lifting.
Are they afraid that they will run into major problems with the infrastructure? For instance, overflows?
Well, they have a
disasters?
significant amount of reserves at the city level, city side.
Well,
So,
not
I mean, it's not
as
as
much.
significant as anticipated before, but it's a healthy reserve that could help bridge, you know, a year or two.
Well,
for sure.
and
So we won't be running in a situation where we have huge costs coming up simply because we weren't able to fix things in time.
Sam is only part of everybody's system.
Yes.
As you know, we have a whole lot of pipelines that we're responsible for. Granada has theirs. Theirs is all gravity flow. They have one pump station. We have, I'm not good with retaining
14.
numbers, 14
Pump stations?
pump stations.
Yes,
And
major.
Half Moon
13
Bay
major.
has 2. So even though they have more lineage in feet, we have more expensive
Yeah.
costs. And so it's all different in that regard, in the sum total that we're talking about for our rate increases.
Well, but after all, it's like a car. You have 4 tires, and if one of them blows, you are done for. So if our sand plant, processing plant blows, we are done for because we are part of it. So the question really is, what kind of an attitude can we expect from the other side in terms of immediate infrastructure investment?
I think after what happened with the major underground pipe blowout 3 years ago, Scott?
Probably been longer now.
3 or 4 years ago. It happened while I was on the board, so 3 or 4 years ago. I believe a lesson was learned, something that previous SAM board members had been talking about, but other SAM
Well,
board
we-
members weren't as interested in hearing, and
But-
so
but-
they
but-
learned that lesson.
I think it's important to note 2 things. One, it wasn't a major blowout, it was a leak. It was, you know, by, you know, the kinds of things that you're talking about would be much more extreme. What we dealt with that led to the fines and led to the agreement to do a whole bunch of repairs, that was a leak. Just pure and simple. And it's a leak that one of our SAM crew members found when he was walking along the beach and
Swimming in the ocean.
and wondered why this usually dry creek bed wasn't dry. And it was his attentiveness and curiosity. Honestly, no one had noticed. As far as we know, no one had noticed until he noticed. So, you know, kudos to him for being attentive and inquisitive and following up on it. But the fact of the matter is, it wasn't really dramatic at all. And what's sad about it is that we had already done the work, working with an engineering firm in 2009, taking out a recommendation on a bunch of work that we should be doing as part of regular maintenance because it had been assessed as we're going to need to be doing this thing. Had we taken those recommendations and found agreement with our partners, we in Granada were advocating for doing the recommended work. Had we done the recommended work, would we have had that leak? We'll never know.
No.
But, you know, it wasn't for lack of trying. It was pure obstructionism. And, you know, Catherine's right. We have, we've agreed with the regulators that a certain quantity of work is going to be done. It's not going to be cheap. It's going to be millions of dollars to do it. The good news is it was all work that we knew already that we needed to do.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's going to be some catch up to be done here. I think at least for that first, was it $8 million? For that first amount, I don't think we're going to have much fighting over that amount. It's the rest of it that's the interesting part. And we have to decide as an agency what approach we're going to take with our partners to try to make sure that the necessary work gets done.
And part of the issue is, for instance, there was a piece of equipment, I don't know whether it was put in 20 years ago or 40 years ago, it was a bust up. I think it was 20 years ago. And it was installed in such a manner that there was a leak that corroded.
Well, it's supposed to be installed. It's the thing that connects the transformer to the switching room. So it's a big chunk of copper that carries power in, and it was instead of installed vertically like this, it was installed horizontally like this, which means that it would cup and hold water, which doesn't have to be a problem, but you do have to maintain it to keep it from corroding. But at some point in the not too distant past, it shorted out and blew a hole like this in a big copper bar, and thank God no one was close by when it happened.
But just to fix that was going to cost a fair amount of money, but by the time they finished with the permits and the other things that had to be added, that fair amount of money was ballooned into about double or triple what had been anticipated. That's what we don't know, is what's going on with the plant right now. Is it the clarifier tanks? Digesters. The digesters, and I apologize for getting into the weeds here, but the digesters are going to be cleaned very soon, and the question is, how many feet of
wipes
of wipes are in the bottom, and how do we get them out, and what will that cost? And they should be done every, I think, 5 to 10 years, and it's been 20 years.
We have a fishing competition.
Well, maybe just like in the case of the water increase, we can sit down again with the finance committee and come up with a proposal for the next meeting.
Thank you. So we'll schedule a finance meeting.
No? Okay. So direction to staff, gentlemen? I don't see anybody waving their hands out.
You have public comment.
I was going to say, I don't have any. Oh, I do. I've got, no, old business. I'm sorry. Sewer rate study, new business. Greg. My apologies.
Okay, so I'll make this short and I'll bring it up with the Finance Committee mostly. But the philosophy here, based on the research I've been doing for the last year, is public works aren't looking ahead long enough. And I think we've seen the problems we run into when you don't do that. What I recommend is a methodology, which I'm going to be writing up shortly, and surveying all the public works general managers and national consultants and other people I've talked to, and saying, is this the right way to go ahead and assess the capital adequacy of your reserves so you know how big a problem you have? It's not to say you fund at the level you should have your reserves, but at least you know how far off you are. Right now, we don't know how far we're off in the water because they didn't even project it. Sewer, at least they projected it and they showed it going down, but the question is, how high should it be? Now, my real concern here is not this district. It's SAM. Because when I ran some numbers over a year ago, all 4 agencies were in trouble. SAM was abysmal. That's my assumptions, my projections. It was terrible. So I'm going to suggest that once, and Peter's going to be involved in this, you're going to be one of the guys I write this paper to, soliciting comment, something needs to be done about SAM and the adequacy of their reserves. Something needs to be done about the fact that agencies are withholding money, keeping it, not letting SAM hold reserves.
That was a policy they decided on.
Something needs to be done. So that's all I'll say in public. We can discuss it more in Finance Committee, and I'll just throw in the connection fees also need to be looked at, and I can go into the reasons for that in the Finance Committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlemen, direction to staff. No direction to staff.
Moving along.
Well, I would suggest that one of the things we may want to look at, given the history of the SAM reserve problem, something I think we should be doing is creating our own internal reserves for SAM so we don't get hit with major surprises that impact rates, and perhaps we should be looking at a 10% rate increase instead of 9% to be able to start with doing that somewhat. Moving right along then to review and possible action concerning adoption of connection charge report.
Yeah, thank you. So I think Greg needs a different look at the connection charge than what we're doing right now. This is a report that we are adopting every year. It's required to Senate Bill 1760. What it essentially does is it shows how much connection fees we collected on water and the sewer side, and it shows how much of these connection fees were spent on capital projects. The background essentially is that if we would have spent less than the amount collected on capital projects, our connection charges would be too high. And that's what this, really the purpose of this report is, to show that our connection charge is not too high. And yeah, so that's what we're showing right here. We spent way more than, so for example, on the we collected in 2019 $317,000, spent $317,000. Of course, we spent way more on capital projects than the $317,000, and I think that's kind of where Greg is trying to go, should these fees be higher. Again, this is a report that we prepare every year. Recommendation is to authorize the filing of the annual connection report with the district clerk. It will be available for review, and anyone can ask for this report.
Okay, public comment? Seeing none. Board? Do we have a motion to authorize filing of the annual connection report? Scott?
A second.
Peter? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Motion, item number 4, review and possible action concerning the fiscal year-end budget to actual review.
So this is a review that we've been doing now since, I think, 4 years. 4 or 5 years. So we every year take a 6 months. We look at the 6 months review, how we perform, and we also look at the year-end budget to actual review, how did we perform. And I would like to hand the word to Peter and just tell us, Peter prepared this report, and just ask him to tell us, what do you see, how do we perform. Yeah. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Clemens. As Clemens said, this is a report looking in the past. It it should coincide more with the adoption of our fiscal year and 6/30/2019 audit because of some delays that happened. It gets pushed back a little bit, but as Clement said, the one that's coming up next is the 6-month finance review. But this one is important because it compares how we project back in April of last year and prepare our budget for 18-19, and then now with actual numbers that have gone through audit to see how it stood up. Our financial statements, we don't have a budget to actual. Some do, we do not. But this really expounds upon our statement of activities that's in our audit. It breaks down our operations into 3 line items: general and admin, and then system and operations, and then depreciation and amortization. This budget actual really goes into in depth far more to see the various categories that are at play for operations. The first page, the way I separate it is to go from sewer and then go into water. But what you're looking at though is the cash flow. This is how we present our budget. So what this does is lay in there our actual as compared to our budget that was approved back in May, June of last year. And a cash flow report, because I said the normal state of activities, the traditional profit and loss statement, does not take into account capital activities as well as debt principal payments over the year. So this does. So this is actually capturing all cash going out the door, which would not be picked up on your traditional P&L. So with that, I've laid out for you guys the executive summary, which discusses all the various revenue and expense categories. I can't expound on much of those, but as Clemens has said, and in previous presentations, and also today, operations-wise, expense, we're doing pretty well. And keeping expenses as low as possible. For the sewer side in particular, not a whole lot, well, revenue-wise, over budget, and a big part of it there is the property tax piece as well as sewer service charges. Property tax, the big item in there is ERAF. We don't budget for it. We've taken the approach that we don't know exactly what it's going to be, so we don't want to be too aggressive and put a big number up there. So we've been conservative throughout the years. We budget a little bit, but not to the tune of what we actually receive. Sewer service charges, looking at revenue increase year over year, was about 27%. It kind of coincides with our rate increase. On the expenditure side of things, well, all the rest of the revenue items that are more or less in line with what we would expect back in April of last year. Expense-wise, you can look through there, not a whole lot of fluctuation. I think we did a pretty good job of planning last year during the budget cycle. Interest revenue, yep, LAIF did very well this past year. The district's treasury is mainly held in LAIF on the sewer side, and that performed exceptionally well. We don't expect the same thing this year because we're going to start spending some of those funds, moving those out of LAIF into operations, so the revenue number is expected to go down. Capital improvement program said this is, we didn't spend as much as we had thought of, as we thought we were going to. A lot of that has to do with timing. 1.4 less than the $4 million we had anticipated. But if you look at the very next page, this is kind of the year over year. 17-18, $300,000. 18-19, $2.5 million. And this was something that we had talked about for years and years and years, as far as the project not moving forward as had been anticipated, but it was something that was not necessarily, the can was kicked down the road, more so that the various regulatory delays, we were not able to work on that project. Finally got all the permits approved, and it's in process. It's still, I can't say for sure whether it's completed, but I know we have spent money on it in this current fiscal year, 1920.
Phase 1 is completed, and unfortunately the permit isn't good for phase 2, and we have to go through that permitting process one more time, so that helps us in the sense of that project is kicked down another year.
And that's, the terminology you use here as far as I understand.
This is Caltrans we're dealing with.
This is Caltrans permit.
It helps us in a way, like I said, that's why, as Alex was saying, our sewer reserves are so healthy, is because this project that was budgeted for year in and year out, and it just didn't get off the ground. So we were many years of $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 put into the ground, as opposed to what we had anticipated to be, $500,000, $600,000 on a yearly basis, just not happening if it was smoothed over. So that's that piece.
And costs are going up.
Correct. The connection fees, better than anticipated. I believe it was 9 connections for the sewer side. And then debt, we know what that's going to be based on the amortization schedules. That is expected, and we pay that. The next page, I said, is always interesting to see the fluctuation year over year. Any questions here, please ask, but you could see in there what it's, I believe, as you had anticipated, or as you would expect for these items to go on a year-by-year basis, increasing, well, actually for the sewer side, decreasing for the most part. Non-operation side, and that's, debt-wise, I think this is just another way to show a fluctuation, not necessarily based on budget, but based on actuals year over year.
So to repeat again, in looking at that, the 722% change in capital improvement program was because of the delayed spending.
Correct.
And the delayed permitting.
I believe this was a project 4 or 5 years in the making.
Yep.
The pages after this are a detail of every single account that we use in our GL, showing our GL code, 16-17 actual, 17-18 actual, approved budget, and 18-19 actual. So see a 3 years worth of back actual numbers. From there, going right into water. Same view. This is the blue page. Once again, going along with our discussion, we actually took in less revenue for water sales than we did in less revenue than we did in 17-18, but less than budgeted. We budgeted flat, and we didn't even get that. So, kind of continuing on with the discussion that we've been having for the past few meetings. It's
people are really good at conserving water.
Absolutely. Other than that, you see the same blip with property tax. Once again, we budget property tax 50-50. It's split 50-50. ERAF as well. $285,000 came in. That's why you have the large over budget. On the expense side, the as Clement had talked about, water quality engineering costs are really shot up this past fiscal year, and we deal with those. And it's just it's just a part of it. Over budget on as a total, not too bad overall for the expenses. A little over or a little under $10,000. So operational, I think we do a pretty good job of trying to get those costs right where we expect them to be. Personnel, I said, we do have the 4th operator. It didn't happen at the beginning of the fiscal year. It happened during the fiscal year, so those costs are down. If you were to look in the actual categories, it's kind of a mixed bag. The healthcare costs are something that was higher than we had expected, so it looks better on the sewers, on the water side, because we were anticipating more salary for that 4th operator. It didn't happen, but it should be a lot better, but we didn't do the best job of budgeting for what medical costs would do for the district. So that's that big piece there. Professional services, legal costs were down. That was helpful. Engineering costs higher.
Thank you, Christine.
But all in all, like I said, looking at the majority of them, As I said, these are the categories. If you look at the actual GL accounts, it typically captures about 5, 6, or 7 with the individual accounts, but all of them within $20,000 up or down. I feel pretty good about it. It's not easy when we look forward in February, March, April of the previous year to get it close. So thanks to staff on this one, Clemens. Going through some more capital improvement. $481,000 budgeted. We didn't quite make it there, but a lot of it's timing. But once again, the next page kind of talks about 17-18, $235,000, $454,000 the last two years. The water, the old business that we discussed going through a year, we're not after the SRF funds were completely utilized about 3 or 4 years ago. We've really kind of it's been a dip in the amount of money that we are putting into our capital needs. And then debt, you'll see those fluctuations there are really due to the SRF loans. Those are due 7/1 and 1/1. The 7/1 payment often gets paid in the current fiscal year. We're early on it. That's what throws it off a bit. So that's what accounts for the variance. The 2-year review, so that the first line there, water sales, taking in less revenue from 17-18, it's tough. It was more or less subsidized by what property tax brought in to overall increase in revenue from one year to the next of $5,000. Not a whole heck of a lot. Expense-wise, we are up quite a bit. A lot of it has to do with the water quality engineering expenses that we bear. Outside of that, debt, we more or less get those right on. The differences there, I budget on a cash basis for the debt. When it comes to the audit, we have to accrue for the months that are captured, so that throws it off a little bit. Once again, after that, the next 4 pages are the detailed GL. All GL accounts that are utilized for the year are there. You can see the history. It's all displayed. The next discussion point there, about 4 pages left, is on the reserves. We go in there as far, this is pulled directly from the budget saying this is what our budget targets are, and these are actual cash on hand as of June 30, 2019. And they speak for themselves, but it's what we have been talking about. Water fund we are way under. Sewer, we are good, but that will change as these projects get underway. There are a number of reserve accounts that we use that are GL distinctions within our GL software, but in reality, it's really 3 accounts. It's a bank account for water, bank account for sewer, and then LAIF, and that's what we have. So, with that, any questions?
I find these kind of numbers easy to read and very useful. I'd like at one point to sit down with you and ask a few questions.
Absolutely, sir.
Over the numbers that you presented. It's a bit of an, how should I say, an overflow to get and study all of this within a day.
Yes.
So, yeah, I would very much like to get back to you.
I think we wanted to do that.
Talk about the budgets more.
Yes. No, we had discussed it. Now, get on the calendar and I'll come down here and we can go over it, because I think it's start up here with that budget view and then going through the categories. But for me, I'm a nerd. I look at those details that every single account we have is important to me in some way, shape, or form, and they're reviewed every month, and we ask questions on general accounts.
And the one thing that I did notice on the presentation every quarter is that the budget is basically a number that has been divided by 12. That doesn't work out too well when it comes to discussing a budget versus actual every 3 months. It doesn't really make much sense because the numbers are shifting.
For the operational expenses, yes and no. We have for our contractors, no, on some instances, but telephone, one of the larger expenses, telephone internet, you get it pretty close. PG&E's pretty close on a month by month, and then they have a large balloon catch-up bill. You're absolutely right. For property tax, for property tax, I said we go 6 months of the fiscal year without having any money come in, and it gets tight when it comes to about November, and then December comes, and we get our first apportionment for property tax, or our first sewer service charge, but before then though, it's Clemens. Hey, we're losing money. We are coming close. We're coming close, and having the discussion. All right, well, when do we make a transfer? Do we need to? This is really the first year that we've actually had to do it, where we went through our operational funds before that first apportionment came in. It's not fun because we don't want. Cash management, of course, is an important part of any organization. Staff does an excellent job of looking at these figures, but it's kind of been something that we haven't had to worry about until you start these major projects that are millions of dollars, and you're paying contractors close to $1 million in a check. It's something that has to be managed. So
yeah, I'd like to discuss that
absolutely
in some more detail.
Absolutely.
Then we get together.
Greg, I see you have a question.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. The legal fees are relatively within budget. Is that because we had a healthy budget amount? 232,000 in sewer and 150,000. Is that all the legal fees regarding the closed session expenses?
Back in, yes, it was discussed, and it was put at a level where
so you
really
budgeted properly.
Yeah, well,
right.
Yes.
Got it. The second question is $276,000 increase in engineering services on the water side. That's about triple. Does that have something to do with the exploration of the water rights, or is there something else going on there for triple on the engineering side on the water?
No, it's slightly elevated due to some additional cost, but we're running into this every year where we're actually under budgeting. So, that's the way I see this, that we run into these costs really every year and under budget every year.
We have...
Yeah, the bottom line is under budget, but that one specific item is over.
But if you look at...
No, I mean, we know that we will see higher costs than what we plug in the budget. So we have this discussion every year. And the decision is to put a lower number in than what staff recommends.
If you were, as I said, we see the category engineering. Within there is the 6200 group, which is three accounts, but it'll also, when we receive bills, some of it is capital in nature, so it's capitalized. But if you look at the actual, it's not our general engineering, it's our water quality engineering. So what that represents, I couldn't answer that question, but it's a specific area within our engineering cost, which has gone up, but it doesn't affect, it's not all of our engineering costs overall.
Any more questions from the board? Okay, this was just for information, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.
Item 5, again, for information, review and, possible action concerning introduction of electronic billing services. I misread that.
Thanks, Catherine.
It says possible action, and then on the item it says for information only, so.
Yeah, I left it up as an action item if the board wants to.
In case we wanted to buy pizza for the staff.
For example. So yeah, this is, I think, very exciting because we didn't really have the option for our customers to have their invoices emailed to them. So this is also the announcement that we actually went to a company called DocuSend and outsourced actually the mailing of the water bill statements. So I want to be quick in pointing out that this is only the mailing of the actual bills. So instead of hitting the print button to this printer, we're essentially sending that file to this procurement company that prints, stuffs in envelopes, and gets it to the customer. And so we did this because it saved us quite a lot on staff time. This was done through temps in the past, and so we were able to save some money by getting it to the procurement service, but we're also gaining now the ability to create a email database for our customers that can be used to send the bills, which would be an additional saving because sending a bill costs us almost $1. But sending it by email is going to cost us only 3 cents. So there is potential future savings in it. And also we still can insert flyers. Our newsletter was, for example, an insert that was run through this company now. So I think this is a very good thing that we now can start collecting emails, sending bills via email to customers, and use these email databases also to get additional information to the customer if we need to.
Good. Comments? Questions?
Does this have anything effect on auto pay?
It doesn't have any effect on auto pay. We were very particular that the bill looks exactly the same. It looked like it looked before. We haven't heard of anyone that really notices a difference between what we are printing and what now DocuSend prints. So it should all remain the same. And yeah, we're just excited that this is an easier way to get information to the customer, get the bills to the customer electronically. I think it's a customer service improvement that we wanted to share with you guys.
So what are we picturing for how people would sign up for this?
So, for example, we would actually like to put this on the bill itself. We still have that capability of entering that sentence. So as soon as we have space available, we've committed actually for the next 2 months this sentence to San Mateo County. I mentioned that before. So as soon as we can do that, we would like to actually alert the customers directly on the bill that they can sign up. Of course, staff will be asking walk-in customers if they are interested in this service. And I think that's also something that's worth sharing in the next newsletter as at least a little blurb.
Good. Exciting.
Consider putting it up on the website or that?
Yes.
Okay.
Great idea. We can do that.
Is the email database, is that something stored at DocuSend or is that something stored here?
Here. I mean, it's in the billing system.
And the billing system already has a provision for...
Yes.
Okay.
And is there a way to ensure that people who got the bill via email opened it?
I'll ask that question. I don't know.
I'll just tell you right now, I just prefer that we not even go down that route,
Oh.
even if it's got the capability.
Okay.
That it's time that we as people figure out the tracking and those kind of things through the kind of techniques that are used to do that kind of thing are things that need to stop.
Okay.
It's a very slippery slope. A lot of companies have gone down that slope like it's a joyride, and the tracking mechanisms, while they're quite ingenious, are insidious, and we shouldn't join in on that.
Okay, thank you.
Good to know.
I hear you. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Moving on, review and possible action. I'm sorry, review of state revolving fund loan 2012 PX 102 completion.
Yeah, so we talked quite a bit about the money that we spent in prior years. And so in 2012, we took a state revolving fund loan over $378,000. That was used for planning expenses for the larger loan, which is $3.7 million. But the smaller loan, the $380,000 roughly, we paid off. And I think that's something to celebrate. The larger loan, the $3.7 million, will be paid off in 2035. And that was used for the construction of the water tanks.
Good. Okay. Any questions? Hearing none, seeing none. Rick? Nope, that was not your hand up. Okay, receipt of USGS certificate for collaboration with Groundwater Ambient Monitoring and Assessment Program, Priority Basin Project.
Yeah, so this is a project from USGS that we've been participating in. We were volunteered to participate in this by what was back then Department of Health Services. It was, yes. So our regulator essentially suggested our system as a participant in this project with USGS. And so they started sampling in 2011 our Alta Vista well. And we've actually gotten some very valuable information from their sampling program that is considered and is worked in on all of our past presentations about the Alta Vista well. And so it complements well what we've been doing. We actually attached some of one of our reports that we received here, just so you can see what was done. Actually, funny story, this was done by Robert Kent, hydrogeologist. His father, Mr. Kent, moved 3 years ago to Moss Beach and actually came into this office. He's also a hydrogeologist and started talking and conversing with us, and we found out that his son was in charge of this USGS program. and so we got a little preview on other data that they've been working on through him.
It basically says that there is no hazardous substances detected that are higher than the legal limits.
Yeah,
right?
Alta Vista well water is of excellent water quality. Yeah. Yes.
Really not in. Almost nothing is even close to the limits.
Yeah.
Right.
I like that we got the age dating tracers. I think that's really cool.
Yes. And that's something that, we started in parallel and then essentially found out, well, they're doing the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. So we were able to connect with them and share information. And that information is Mark Washner considered as our hydrogeologist. Mark Washner has all that information, and we're using this information as well. So it worked well for us as well as for USGS, and we got a nice certificate that we can hang up on the wall.
Always nice.
And we're not poisoning our consumers.
Most important, yep.
That's the good news. Okay, we are at the end of new business. Reports, Sewer Authority Mid-Coast Side meetings. Rick, do you want to handle the...
Sure, I'll start and you can fill in what I forget. The biggest item I thought the most interesting for the whole community was we had a resolution commending John Zava, who retired. He spent 16 years plus with SAM. I thought he gave a very excellent closing speech, basically challenging the district to look at global warming and energy efficiency, and why aren't we looking at electric trucks instead of gas trucks. And it was a pretty inspirational speech to head out with. I think he put some good challenges out there for everybody. We had an update on the emergency digester problem that Catherine mentioned earlier. I think it's going to be fixed or started fixing in February. And then there were a couple updates on scope of work with management partners and wastewater management.
And
He said that they had released the money for the next phase of the Granada horse team. Was that? You should have made a little side comment real quick. Okay.
that's moving forward. The other was we established the Board Operations Committee and the Board Finance Committee as standing committees and set time and place for the meetings, and we're going to appoint directors, but Director Penrose wanted those appointments to come from as recommendations from within the member boards. So we need to establish and tell Sam who we want to be the Board Operations Committee member and the Finance Committee member, and if they have to be SAM board members, and the alternate needs to be the member who is not the SAM board member, either me or Rick, who is not officially primarily on the board. I am on the Finance Committee. I'm happy to be on the Operations Committee as well, since it's on so many other committees.
Sam's now telling us how to conduct our business?
They said that, no, they said they didn't want us telling SAM how to conduct its business as to who the members are.
Composed of SAM board members?
Yes.
Yeah, it's inappropriate. Here's what I think. We've asked and delegated such responsibilities to our SAM board members. And
yes.
I think as a standard bit of practice, our SAM board members come back, report, and we often discuss. And where there are matters of policy, we discuss policy and often give direction to our SAM board members.
So you don't mind if the rest of the board doesn't mind if the SAM board members work this out amongst ourselves?
Well, I can't speak for the rest of the board,
no,
but my thoughts
that's why I was turning my head around.
We delegated on purpose, and we appreciate the high degree of interaction that we have. And one thing I really appreciate is that it's entirely normal for the SAM board members to come back and ask for direction, or to ask for confirmation that things are still on track. And, sometimes we're all on the same page, and sometimes we're not, and we discuss it, and it's all good.
So I hear from the majority of the board that Rick and I can duke it out.
What's the status of the wet weather project?
It's basically on track. It was re-bid due to the incredibly bad process we had before.
And it's significantly reduced.
It's significantly reduced. It's going to happen this year during the dry season. There was this effort to crush it in at the end of last year in the rainy season with huge penalties, and it was a disaster. We got permission to delay the project to this year from those, ERFP. So it's all on schedule at much better bid rates for this year.
Okay, thank you.
With Half Moon Bay participation.
Okay.
And the Finance Committee, just a brief report, is that the audit for 17-18 is very, very close to finished. They expect to be, they're having a they're having a conference call with the auditors, and hope, rather than having to send over a lot of invoices and receivable receipts and deposits and so on, that they can just send a list. The new Tyler technology is working well, and it's making this much easier. The 18-19 audit prep is starting and will be handled by Mays. The budget prep discussion is starting, and the budget will be on OpenGov. They have a new fellow from Management Partners, a group out of Sacramento, Hussein, who will be working on the budget. He says he can incorporate the capital improvement program and meet the deadlines on the budget timeline. Half Moon Bay said that it didn't want the budget presented on March 31st because it was too soon and they wouldn't be ready for it. I did suggest that perhaps they could just then go to OpenGov to look for it when they finally needed it.
Or they can talk to their staff and ask what staff thinks about
Exactly.
the timing of the budget.
So for that,
So we've had, the past few years, bitter complaints about how late the budget was coming in, and now we've got to not only have a schedule, but some reason to believe that we're on track, and this is a problem.
yes.
It's a problem, but homework's going to be done before they're ready to review the homework.
Yes.
I mean, I was always wanting to get my homework assignments done the night before they were due, but I always admired those people who had it done early.
The week
They always
before.
seem to have much more fun on the weekends than I did. That's what it looked like to me.
Yes.
I just got a text for those interested, if anybody's heading north to Pacifica. There was a big accident and Highway 1 is closed in both directions north of the tunnel.
Again.
So for people who might be heading northward, this was about 10 minutes ago.
Oh boy.
I guess you are going, yeah.
Okay.
We have 2 extra bedrooms at our place.
I
can't go.
I have extra if somebody needs it.
Mid-Coast Community Council meeting, the important news is, well, there's several. At the last meeting, Harvey Rareback suggested that as a
On the
result...
Half Moon Bay City Council.
Suggested that as a result of the editorial on the January 2nd Half Moon Bay Review suggesting consolidation of special districts, he suggested that we should get the study process going. That was based on the comments that some citizens had come to the Half Moon Bay City Council meeting and had suggested that.
So I want to be clear on the pronouns. You said we should get the...
We being he said he used the pronoun we. I'm not sure whether he meant we being Half Moon Bay or we being the special districts. He did not.
Or perhaps the county, or...
He did not
or
say...
we, the campaign committee for the grand unification.
He did not say we who. Rick Lohman's letter was in the paper. Response was in the paper yesterday.
Well, thank you, Rick. That was a very good article.
The basic comment is there is a legal process for consolidation through LAFCO. And I was going to go to Half Moon Bay and give out Martha Poyadas' phone number. They can tell you the process. In the 30 years I've been in the coast, none of the pro-consolidation people have ever even considered the legal process. So one can only assume, I feel, that they don't want to go through the process, which would involve signature gathering and actual votes in the agencies. And they will be attempting some grand plan, which I termed a takeover, not a consolidation.
And that leads us right back to Scott's question about who's we. I won't go on with the rest of that quote. Because the county is having a planning commission hearing next Wednesday at 6 p.m., a very convenient time for people who work to attend, in Half Moon Bay for an item that is going to be in Moss Beach. They apparently couldn't, so I think I will stifle myself with this and just suggest that people write to the county saying for a project in Moss Beach, please hold the hearing in Montara, Moss Beach. You can hold it at Farallon View School. Whatever the subject matter is, and those who have been watching through this meeting have heard that it is about the affordable housing project. I believe it's only appropriate that the hearing, which is so important to this community, be held in this community, not in Half Moon Bay, where people have trouble getting there, particularly on a work day.
At rush hour.
And during rush hour, that's right. And all you have to do, perhaps we should invite the planning commissioner members to sit alongside the highway from 5 o'clock until 6 o'clock and look at the crowd of, the stream of traffic coming up.
Maybe we could have them park over by the sheriff's station. We could all meet for dinner over across the street at the burrito place. And they could all try out the janky crosswalk.
Crosswalk? That would be, that would be.
It is. I can't think of an example of anything that I've seen Caltrans ever do. There's no way that Caltrans actually did that work. Because their work is usually
pretty cheaply made.
Their work is usually pretty top notch. When they finally get down to doing it, they tend to do good work. There's no way that was done. I have much more respect for Caltrans than I do for that janky crosswalk.
Speeding right along, CSDA report.
There is none. We haven't had a meeting yet.
LAFCO report?
LAFCO was yesterday. There was the standard mini annexation of somebody who lost their septic system and they got annexed into San Carlos. But the most interesting item was a presentation by Melissa Vergaro of the San Mateo County Office of Community Affairs on the 2020 census. And we received kudos in public because I believe, I didn't see it, but on our bills or something, or our newsletter, we sent out a notification about the importance of this census.
Now, our being this district.
Montara. And we were 2 people who were mentioned in the public presentation on film. So the quick gist is everybody should realize how important the census is. They're going to, starting in March, email notifications to people. You will be able to complete your census online. It'll be kiosks in libraries and lots of public places, tons of notifications, but she kept emphasizing and emphasizing because the citizenship question will not be on the thing. We need to help in any way anybody can to get people registered. You know, if you know people who have problems, and they're talking homeless, people who are living in vans, like in Palo Alto, where there's just rows of RVs of, you know, temporary workers. Anything we can do locally, I can post a phone number if we want to post it on our website. You know, here, if you want to help, they're hiring people with what I consider pretty reasonable salaries in the $20 to $25 an hour range. So if you're sitting around and need a little income, you could have some office jobs or walk-around jobs, and this is especially critical for California because this obviously determines our representation in Congress. So we need to make sure everybody, they're doing, it seems like, an amazing job. They've contacted like thousands of groups to just try to get the message out, especially to the people who might be a little more hesitant to be interviewed or harder to find. So any information people can give, we'll post the phone number. You know, call the folks, volunteer to help. You can get paid for it too. But this is a really big thing for California to maintain our representation in Congress. So that was the big thing they did.
Thank you.
Good. Okay, attorney's report.
No report.
Director's reports.
I can give the phone number.
Sure.
I just found it real quick. 1-855-JOB-2020. And we want to put a link, so any information you can give, help to offer, 1-855-JOB-2020. Let's get them counted.
Good, good. Okay, general manager's report.
Yeah, I attended a meeting at SAM today, and we looked at an RFP for a new attorney. That's supposed to go out at one point. And we also talked about the collections contract that we've looked at with the Granada Community Services District and the City of Half Moon Bay as well. So this is slowly morphing in something into a direction.
Just real quick on the attorney thing, we made an offer or a comment to the current attorneys, who are gonna drop off. Made the proposal they're gonna look at is maybe you could hang on for existing legislation that's already rolling along and have the new attorneys pick up the new stuff rather than trying to retrain an entire new attorney group. So it just might be something that'll smooth the transition even more because of all the ongoing stuff we have with various things. So.
Yes. Yeah, and that's my input. Thank you.
Good. Okay, let's, future agendas.
Well, we just heard something today about the wipes, and this goes along with an email that I got from the person that asked for some funding at the Sewer Authority Mid-Coast site, similar topic. So we can potentially invite her for this item as well.
Good. Okay, let's take a recess and convene in closed session.
So CHP says there's a large amount of oil